Welcome to Prime Time, a show for adults in the prime of life. I'm Susan Hoskins, the Executive Director of the Princeton Senior Resource Center. We're a nonprofit organization serving the greater Princeton area with programs and services for older adults, their families, and caregivers. We seek to educate people about current issues and connect you with the resources that you need. Visit us at the Suzanne Patterson Building behind Princeton Borough Hall, or at Spruce Circle, or visit our website, which is www.princetonsenior.org. The contact information will be on again at the end of the show. I'm happy to welcome Lori Pausner today as my guest. Lori is the Executive Director of the Funeral Consumers Alliance and on the board of the National Funeral Consumers Alliance, as well as being a licensed clinical social worker in private practice. I know a lot of folks in town have met you in one of your many hats, and I invited you to come on today because I really want to talk about what the Funeral Consumers Alliance does and what kind of resources you have. So let's just start out by talking about what is this alliance.
Okay. Well, there's a national organization called the Funeral Consumers Alliance that is the umbrella organization over about 100 affiliates throughout the United States, and almost every state has one. Our local group is called Funeral Consumers Alliance of Princeton, and we're an entirely volunteer-run, we're 501c3, not-for-profit, education and advocacy organization. So what we do is try and give people the information that they need to do a little bit of advanced planning, get some information, become an educated consumer of funeral goods and services. Most people don't call that, but we do. And sort of look at it a little more from the aspect that it is a business transaction and we don't want people to be taken advantage of or even make mistakes, buy things that they didn't want or, you know.
So it sounds like you sort of think of it like going to buy a car.
Yes.
You don't just say, my car broke down, rush into the the local car dealership. Well, I guess some people
do. The closest one.
You go to the closest one and you say,
right.
Give me a car,
yes.
and they hand you everything. And so what you're advocating is the same kind of thing that many people do for a car, is to read the guides, go on the web, find out the prices of different things,
yes.
and then begin to put together your own package of what do you want. Do you want air conditioning?
Right. You're taking my best story. This is perfect segue, where I talk about that if, you know, the National Funeral Directors Association will tell you that the average funeral is $7,000-8,000. And that doesn't include the cemetery costs, buying a vault, buying a plot, opening and closing fees, buying a headstone. You know, you're easily talking $12,000 for a traditional funeral. When people go to buy...
that $3,000 life insurance policy doesn't go that far.
Right, right, exactly. When people buy a refrigerator, you know, any major appliance or a car, they look at Consumer Reports, and we like to say that we are the Consumer Reports of funeral purchasing. The other thing that happens is when somebody goes to make this major purchase, usually this is a weird statistic, but I looked it up and it's true. Most people buying a funeral, they're buying their first one. So I think what it is the majority of people are buying one, and then there's always that one person in the family that plans a bunch of them. And so they walk in, usually at need, is what funeral directors call it. They're in shock, they're grieving, they're overwhelmed. And what I say to people is picture going to buy a new car the day after your partner or child or parent died. And that sort of attitude of, you go to the car dealer and you go, oh, what do you think I need? And they're actually really nice. Funeral directors, by and large, have gone into the field because they like to work with people.
And many are several generations.
Yes, and they're very caring. I mean, we all know there's some bad ones out there, and we hear the stories, but they're nice people, and they want it to work for you, so they're very comforting. But it's as if you're at the car dealer saying, oh, you think I need seat warmers and a sunroof? Okay, I'll do it, right? And you just, you aren't in a position.
And there's an emotional piece there, too, where you feel like, if I say no, then am I not doing the right thing by mom or dad or my spouse of 60 years?
Yes, yes. There's still a very entrenched feeling that you should buy something really nice to show that you loved this person. And I think most people, when they really think about it, realize that that's not what love is, and it's not about what you buy for them, and especially when they're not going to know.
Well, and I think also that a lot of people have attended funerals but haven't looked beyond the guest book, haven't really gone through all of those steps of what it takes to put one together. And you think about the parts that you see, which are the funeral director greeting you at the door and what the program has been set up to be and all, but there's so many other decisions. And I think, again, when a person is just emotionally drained, that's a really hard time to make those decisions.
And many of the decisions you could make that would make a funeral more personal or less expensive, whatever your motivation is, are things that you really would have to plan ahead. Because at that moment, to think about having to go, let's say something like the book that you sign when you come in. We all know they're usually like white leatherette or something. They're not particularly nice, and they cost a lot of money. You could go find a beautiful handmade paper one that would really be a more touching keepsake for you. But you're not going to do it right after someone died. It's something you might want to think about ahead of time and sort of, prepare yourself. And a nice urn. It's so much easier to just buy an urn from a funeral director. But you can, in fact, buy an urn anywhere. You can go to, I don't want to be tacky, but you can go to Marshall's and buy an Asian vase with a lid. And, maybe Mom always liked an Asian vase, and there's a lot of ways that it can, or making your own programs. Making your own programs for the funeral. You can probably, might have someone in your family that could just do a beautiful, touching program or prayer cards for a fraction.
And there are often people who want to help, but you don't know what to ask them to do. And sometimes it depends on what the length of time is that you have between when you learn that a person has passed and when you need to do some of those things. And I think that's another place where people make a lot of assumptions. Oh, we've got to do this as quickly as possible.
Right. And there is technically there is some hurry because unless you're going to have a cremation or a direct burial, if you're going to have a funeral a week later, you're not going to have it a month later. Usually, if the body's present, there's only a certain amount of time. So there is sort of a sense of rush, and it's realistic. So.
A few weeks ago, we had a memorial service for my brother-in-law's father, who had actually died a year ago, but it was the right time to bring the whole family together. His brother-in-law, who's a potter, had made the urn. And it really made it very special. And then he and his sister talked about the things that they had chosen to put in. And I just had such a strong sense of how having the months and having some distance from the emotional impact had given them a time to think about what was really special about Pop and what did they want to add into this urn before they put it in the ground. And it
I often
really
think
sweet.
Around 2 to 6 weeks or 2 to 8 weeks would be a perfect time, and it's really sad that so many people do have to have the service right away, especially when it was a young person, a child or a young partner, someone in their 40s who dies of a heart attack or something, and it was completely unexpected. Those families need some time, and the people that I've known who have died young, when the families have waited 2 weeks or 3 weeks and done the service, it's just, they make it what they want. And sometimes I do equate it to a wedding, that, hopefully you only get one wedding. I guess you could have more. But people only have one chance at that funeral. And, there's been research done on satisfaction. And so many people are unhappy with some aspect of how the funeral went. And it really is an extremely important life event to celebrate or commemorate or whatever. And if you don't have the time to do it well, can you imagine pulling a meaningful wedding together in 3 days?
Right.
You'd be flying around like a nut, and you wouldn't be able to experience the emotions that you were going through. And
I saw someone several years ago who had lost her daughter suddenly and unexpectedly. And when her son came and told her and her husband died of a heart attack. So within 2 days, she lost both her daughter and her husband. She doesn't remember either funeral.
Right.
because
So
the doctor
overwhelming.
immediately put her on tranquilizers, and just the impact of it, the shock of it, was so much. And so part of what she wanted to talk about was to go over and to try, in some ways, to have her own memorial
Yeah.
of them and of what had happened and put the pieces together, because she had no memory. And I thought that was
Right.
so sad,
Yeah.
where my own tradition is one of waiting, usually like 2 to 6 weeks, and by the time you get together, there really is a celebration of a life, and people can tell stories and laugh.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love about it is getting a picture of the whole person's life,
Right.
because some people knew that person in their younger years,
Yeah.
middle years, later
Right.
years, and by the end, you've put more pieces together than you ever knew.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to something you were saying earlier, because you're talking about that suddenness often of people saying, okay, I've got to go, I've got to take care of the funeral arrangements. They walk in. My experience is that a lot of times people are also coming from a different state. And I know there are some differences state to state about what kinds of options people have, or...
So because you're dealing with the children that live out of state, is
Yeah,
that what you mean?
long
And
distance,
you've known
adult
this senior that lives
Right,
locally.
right.
And so the child is coming here
Like,
to
let's
plan
say-
the funeral,
right,
or
like-
they want the body sent
Let's
there?
say one of our friends here in Princeton, and one family member's in Boston, and one's in California, and one's in Texas.
Yeah,
And those 3 kids come in, and now
right.
they have
To do the planning.
to do the
Yeah.
planning.
Well, I would love it if you tell every single one of your friends that the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Princeton offers a whole planning kit, basically, where sometimes people don't realize just what a gift it is to tell your children, and let's talk about seniors because it's easy. Obviously, everybody dies, but we're talking about seniors. So it's such a gift to your survivors to say, you know what, I'd like this and that, or I don't care, do whatever you want, or please don't spend a lot of money because it doesn't fit with my beliefs. I'd rather the money go to the grandchildren or to my favorite charity. If you have an opinion about something that's going to happen to you after you're dead, share it. Even if you don't have an opinion, share that. Because I can't tell you, with all my years with hospice, how many family members say, oh, would mom have wanted this, or would she have wanted that, and the kids are arguing, or they're just stressed. You know, it doesn't need to be as stressful as it is. It's going to be
So
emotional.
It's sort of a continuation of those end-of-life issues.
Yes, exactly.
Would mom
it's more
want
the same.
antibiotics? Would mom want the
Right,
feeding tube?
absolutely.
If you've had that conversation,
Right.
it's much easier to say, I had this conversation
Exactly.
with mom. I know this is what her feeling
Right.
was.
And we
Especially
hear it,
when you're the local sibling and there's
Oh,
a sibling
sure.
from a distance.
and we
but
hear it from both sides. Where
Yeah.
sometimes it's the parent saying, "Oh, I couldn't bring it up with my kids," and then we'll hear the kids saying, "I couldn't possibly bring it up to mom." Seniors know that it's easier for you to bring it up with your children because you're the one who's more likely to die sooner. And what I always tell people too is, don't wait till you're terminally ill, and don't wait till your parent is terminally ill to ask them.
Right.
Because then that's a very difficult time to talk about this. Much better to talk about it over Thanksgiving one year when everybody's visiting and say, hey, you know what? I just read an article about green funerals. What do you think? Or, hey, you know what? I never thought about, do you guys want to be buried or cremated? You know, it's
Or I just went to. I mean, as we get older,
Yeah.
we go to more
Right.
funerals. So
Right.
I just went to Harry's funeral, and
yeah, they
they
did
did this
and
really
that, and
cool
yes.
thing. And
I was telling your producer that I just asked my parents about, we've already settled on green funeral, but I asked them if they wanted to do a home funeral. I thought it would be, you know, they're so well known,
Yeah.
and to have this out there as a possibility for people done in a really nice way might, you know, so.
So why don't you talk about both of those things? Because I think they're both intriguing ideas that people may not know about, because those are more non-traditional.
Yes,
So
yes.
what is a home funeral?
Okay.
What is a green funeral?
Well, a home funeral is, it's actually what we used to do. Before the Civil War, we didn't have embalming, and people took care of their own dead. And in most of the world, people
Lay them
take
out in
care
the
of their-
parlor. And
Absolutely. The reason a funeral parlor was called a funeral parlor is because we used to lay our dead out in our own parlors. That can be done, you know, depending on the season, you know, with dry ice or ice packs or whatever, that can still be done. It's legal to take care of your own dead. Most people have no idea. They think oh, you have to ship it off right away. So a home funeral, which is often done when people, most often done, it's not often done at all, but when it's, when it's done, it's most often people who maybe have died on hospice because they're already home. The family has already seen the benefit of caring for someone. You know, as a social worker, and I'm sure you've seen it too and agree, caring for the person who's dying is extremely beneficial to the family. Even if you, it's really much easier if you loved them, but even if you had a conflictual relationship, any healing that can be done by even just bringing someone a glass of water or helping them drink from a straw or adjusting a pillow can really repair a lot of damage. People tend to always feel guilty after someone dies, no matter how much they did, but this can reduce it. It can lessen the guilt, and there's research that shows that bereavement is eased by caring for the person as they die. I now strongly believe that bereavement is eased by being someone involved in caring for the dead. And I know that's really an out there kind of statement to be making at this time. But I come from a family. I never saw a dead body until I worked at hospice. Everybody was either closed casket, immediate cremation. People in my family could not even understand why you would want to see a dead body, how gross. And I have become a complete and utter convert to the other side, where I think it's very important to see the body. I think it's very important to let it sink in that the person has died. And when we call the funeral home right away, and they're there within 2 hours, and they take the body away, and the next time you see it, if you see it at all, it's embalmed, there is an unreality. And Americans, all the, you know, Kubler-Ross, everybody, this whole disbelief phase, this whole, I can't believe she's really dead, I think can be very, very much easier when you're involved even a little bit. So with hospice, we tell people, you don't need to call. You don't even need to call the nurse right away, but we would like to know. The nurse can do the pronouncement, send the death certificate to the doctor. You don't need to call the funeral director right away. You actually have 48 hours in New Jersey. Now,
I remember when you talked with our caregivers group, how that was one of the facts that really stuck with me. And all of them, you could just see people going, you mean I could actually just sit with my dad?
Yes, and Dad in his pajamas, in his bed with his own quilt pulled up. And you know, yes, he's dead, and he'll look dead, but he's not going to look any different.
Or it's going to take my brother 2 hours to get here, or 5 hours to get here.
Or 12 hours to get here.
Just here in his bed at home. Not, you know.
Yeah, turn on the air conditioning if it's summer. You know, the hospice nurse, or you
things
can get
aren't going to start crawling out of him in 5
not
hours.
right away.
We could have that time, and then we have our own very private time at home before we start dealing with all of those things.
And I do remember
people really don't know that.
No, they don't know it. And one of the people in our group had a niece die. Do you remember this story? So it's often much more accessible to people to think about a home funeral when it comes to children. So you've been taking care of your child. And you know she's going to die, and she dies. You've been washing her, feeding her, bathing her. Do you think you stop loving that child the minute they die? No.
Of course not.
So, and that's sort of a new thought for people. Lots of people just sort of think, this is my husband, that's a dead body.
But the closure process of being able to wash that child or husband for the last time, to be able to pick the clothes, help clothe them, do all of those things
it's
that,
a final
as a caregiver, you've been doing, but there's a kind of closure. So you talk about being sort of on the more radical end of this now, and I just want to, I know you well enough to know that what this presents is that you're willing to talk to people across a wide range. That if somebody calls you and says, I want to talk about what my options are, you're not going to push them to that radical end.
No, we give people all the range of options. Yes.
But that whole range is there, and that people can talk to you, that you are so comfortable talking about death and dying. That people can ask wacky questions and, you know,
and it doesn't
ask
have
things
to be
like
somber. It doesn't have to be, you know, it can
and
be
as a hospice social worker and working in a hospice team, sometimes it's just questions like, you know, is it going to be messy? And you need to have answers to very practical questions. And so knowing that there are people like you who can go anywhere with any questions.
And the traditional stuff already gets a lot of advertisement, so we are more likely to let people know, oh, you could do this, you could do that, because they've never heard it. They've never heard that you don't need to call the funeral home right away. They've never heard that you don't have to use a funeral home. you know, although in New Jersey you kind of have to, but
But the funeral home directors are also open to a wide range of options.
some of them
You know,
are.
can we support you?
Yes.
And that's maybe one of the things, you know, like the car dealer, you're looking for,
Absolutely.
okay, funeral director A, B, and C, let me interview you and
Right.
see which one of you is most comfortable helping me to do what my family has talked about.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we tell people to do, is you want to find a funeral director who is flexible and willing to work with you. Even if what you want to do is fairly traditional, you still want someone that is not going to make you feel bad about any choice you make, who's going to be completely accepting and try and work with you to make it the best experience it can be considering the circumstances. And Funeral Consumers Alliance of Princeton does vet funeral homes. So we have sort of our preferred provider list where we will recommend funeral homes that we have known to be flexible and cooperative. We have all the prices of all the area funeral homes. We collect price lists. We can really help people do some shopping. And again, there was a great study that showed that even when people were unhappy with the funeral, they would still go back to the same funeral homes. And you sort of say, why? It's because it is so overwhelming. People think they need to use the funeral home that is closest to them.
Yeah.
And if they want a direct cremation, it could be in Pennsylvania.
It's not a tow truck service.
So,
That's great.
oh, and
You were talking about green.
green.
So let's-
Okay, green is sweeping the nation. It's actually sweeping the world. Britain is way ahead of us on this. There are several different ways to do green funerals, but this generation that used cloth diapers on their babies and is very interested in recycling and all kinds of environmental sustainable practices are interested in green funerals now. The greenest funeral, the top of the line green funeral, is to actually be buried in an eco-preserve. And there are a few in the United States, but a lot of people here aren't going to want to be married in North Carolina because they don't have a connection to the area. But eco-preserves, and I'm hoping we can get something like this started in New Jersey. Americans are loath to move their dead, right? Once there's a cemetery there, no one should touch it.
Right.
That's kind of an advantage if you want to preserve land. So eco-preserves have lots of rules. You can't plant anything but native plants. The stones that are the grave markers have to be field stones that were found on the property. The bodies have to be buried at exactly 36 inches or 2 feet or whatever it is. It's all about enriching the soil in a natural way and making for a beautiful nature preserve that will not be touched because we don't like to touch that. And you can do a pretty green funeral around here. If you have a big enough piece of property, depending on your county rules, you could have a home, you could have a graveyard, and you could have a, what's it called, a family cemetery.
Yeah.
Most people
Going
aren't going
back
to do
a
that.
couple of centuries.
Yes,
where
exactly.
they're-
But some farms
Yeah.
around here do have family cemeteries. You could even be buried in a local cemetery. No embalming, because embalming fluids are not only toxic to the embalmers, who have much higher rates of certain cancers and things because of what they're working with. It's also all that stuff goes into the sewer system. When it's buried in the ground, there's a certain amount of leaching. It's just not a great idea. I mean, it's probably not going to harm anybody. But metal caskets, concrete vaults, all that stuff. I just heard Mark Harris speak. He's the one who wrote Grave Matters, who spoke at our annual meeting. And he actually gave us the statistics. I think it was something like the Golden Gate Bridge is buried every year in
Wow.
metal caskets or vaults or something. It was some crazy statistic of what we're putting into the ground every year. So let's say you wanted to be buried in Princeton Cemetery. You could say no embalming. You could be buried in a shroud or a biodegradable casket of some kind. It could be a plain box, a wooden box without nails, a traditional Jewish casket, the plain pine box. Could be a cardboard container, a paper, wicker. There's a million choices now. And instead of asking for the full vault, which is required by the cemetery, not by law, to keep the grass flat, you could ask for a grave liner, which is more like a flipped over box so that you can return to the earth. That concrete or plastic is still in the ground, but it's the best you can do locally. So I'm sure the Jewish cemeteries must not have vaults. I'm guessing. I should look into
Well, I
that.
think also, in a way, we've gotten very used to this idea of big, wide open cemeteries in the United States
Yeah.
because we've had all the space.
Right.
But you look at older towns, I mean,
Oh,
you look
yeah.
at the cities, and you look at some place like England, I mean, of course, they're on the
They-
leading edge.
Yeah.
You know, because of a very different idea about
Exactly.
space and how we use space.
And not so much upset around, for instance, in Greece, you're only, and they have a lot of land, so this is different. You'll see this cute little cemetery on a hillside, and you get that spot for 3 years. And then they dig it up, they put the bones in the ossuary, and your spot's taken by someone else.
Interesting.
And in England, they've done that in many of the city cemeteries where people are just buried over and over and over, and then they'll dig up bones. And
In contrast to the scandal in Philadelphia, where that's been happening, but not legally.
right, exactly. Yeah,
And
it's a
you know,
little
the
different.
stress is that none of the
Yeah.
families knew. And,
Oh, of
and
course.
that's
Right.
such a feeling of violation.
Sure.
So another, just as we're talking about different kinds of options, one of the things that came to mind is the option when a person chooses to donate their body to science. And it's my understanding that when that arrangement is made, that the hospital makes the arrangement and the body goes off, but then the family's left kind of, well, now what do we do?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple
so talk
different
about
things.
some of the
One,
things that
it's
happen here.
actually, it can be a little bit complicated, and I'll try
Okay.
not to go into detail, but
Yeah.
lots of people want to be organ donors. And that, I have to say, 100% is a good idea.
Yeah.
I will not budge on that one. Being an organ donor is a life-saving
gift.
thing. Yes. So if you're an organ donor, you have to, you know, if you're there's a variety of things that would make you not able to donate heart, lungs, major organs.
Right.
If you are a donor, that is done at the hospital, and then much like surgery, you are sewn, you are repaired, and then you can still have a traditional funeral. If you are an organ and tissue donor, which is typically what you're doing on your driver's license when you say, I'll take anything, that can be a little more invasive. And if you, it's possible that there won't be much left.
Right.
So often after that kind of a donation.
Or there's some time that goes by. So if your
Sure.
if your faith tradition says you need to do something quickly, then
Yeah, you probably couldn't be a full
Yeah.
tissue donor that way. Donating your body to science, a whole body donation to a medical school, it's the funeral. The medical school has a funeral home, and that funeral home is, I mean, they've contracted with one, and that's who's coming. But you do get ashes back. Usually after a year, it could be 2 years. So there is still something, but it is a little abrupt. But as long as it's necessary, people do feel good about doing it, and families
Right.
hopefully feel good about the gift their person
Yeah.
has made. But
I've heard that they often have wonderful memorials after a year with the
Yes.
medical students
I
that,
think they're lovely.
that used
Yes.
that learned from that experience and
Yes.
that gift of sharing again. So final thoughts. All of a sudden we've whizzed through the time.
I
and
know. It's never enough time.
Right.
Final thoughts for me, it would just be that I think it's really, really beneficial for people to think about this before they need it. As much as you want to avoid the topic, because people don't want to think about dying, or they, you know, wherever they are on it, I will make it pleasant. They can talk to me. We only exist to give away information. And it will make it a much more pleasant experience and a much more personal experience. And this is not the main selling point, but it will be a much less expensive experience too, if they plan ahead a little bit.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. So I hope people will contact you if they have
Sure.
questions. Again, we'll put up that information
Okay.
for you. And Lori, thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming in and talking
Thank you.
today.
Thanks for having me.